Hey, everybody. It feels like it's been 2 months, even though it's only been 2 weeks. Nice to see you all. First of all, for those of you who might be new to the channel, welcome. My name is Lori Hellis. I'm a retired criminal defense attorney and have practiced for 27 years before retiring to write. And I'm under contract to write a book about the Vallow Daybell case. And here on True Crime Wednesdays, we talk about all kinds of true crime cases. And we have a lot to talk about, to catch up with, because I have been off for the last 2 weeks because I just had hip replacement surgery. I want to say thanks to all of you who sent me such sweet, good wishes and such nice, encouraging comments. I've done very well. I'm not walking around on a walker anymore, not even using a cane. My physical therapist tells me I'm well ahead of where he would expect me to be. And I'm off the heavy duty pain meds, just down to ibuprofen. And so doing well. I will tell you though, excuse me, that I get a little tired by the end of the day. Sorry about that. Still plenty of allergy season to go around in Idaho. I will tell you though, by the end of the day, I'm a little bit tired. And so I'm not going to make any excuses for the ums and the ahs tonight, because I'm still a little tired by the end of the day. So stick with me though, because we have a lot to talk about. So we have some updates on several cases that I'm going to go over. And then I'm going to tell you a little story about a case that that happened in my hometown while I was still practicing, and where I know a lot of the people who were involved in the case. I was not involved directly in the case, which means that I'm not covered by attorney-client privilege, and so we can talk about it. So we're going to talk about that toward the end. But as you might remember, I like to sort of give everybody updates and talk for a while. And then the second half of the show, we'll take questions. So hold your questions because we don't want them to get lost. If you start talking, if you start asking questions too early, then Michelle loses track of them. So please hold your questions while we get into it. First of all, I want to talk about the Vallow Daybell case and sort of update what's happened since I had, for the last 2 weeks, since I've had surgery. Lori Vallow turned 50. I bet she didn't ever think she'd be celebrating the big 5-0 in jail and soon to be in prison. But there you are. On June 23rd, the defense filed a motion for a trial transcript because they certainly are going to appeal. She had had filed a motion for a new trial, and the judge denied it. So the next recourse would be for her to ask for a trial transcript and file a notice of her intent to file an appeal. There was a lot of discussion about victim impact statements. Apparently, many people filed requests to make victim impact statements, and the judge has reviewed the law as it applies in Idaho to victim impact statements and has, in fact, denied all of the victim impact statements except for the same people who have been considered immediate family. So Kay was considered the representative for JJ, Summer Shiflett was considered the representative for Tylee, and Tammy Daybell's family would and her children would be able to give statements as well. Larry Woodcock will not be allowed to give a victim impact statement. Now, I'm certain it will come in through Kay, but he will not be allowed to individually give his own victim impact statement. And I know that that makes a lot of people really mad. I try really hard to tell you when I think Judge Boyce is right, as often as I tell you when he's wrong. I feel like my responsibility is to give you my opinion about the case, and that includes being as fair as I possibly can. Now, y'all know I don't like Judge Boyce, and I'm the first one to say I don't like Judge Boyce. But I am going to tell you when I think that his rulings are correct according to the law. And so I believe that he is correctly ruled according to the law. The problem with him going beyond that and allowing other people who are not authorized under the law is that the defense will then take that and say the judge was improperly swayed in sentencing by allowing in people who were not allowed by law to give victim impact statements. So he runs the risk of the defense coming back and making it an appellate issue that he was harder on her in sentencing because of what he heard in the victim impact statements from people who were not properly allowed to give those statements. So while I understand that people are very unhappy with that ruling and angry, and I don't blame you, it seems very unfair. I also understand that Judge Boyce is making the proper decision based on the law. He doesn't have to agree with the law. He just has to make the decisions appropriate under the law. So we don't know how he feels about that. We just know how he ruled. So victim impact statements for Lori's sentencing, which is set for the 31st of this month, will come only from those people who are allowed under the law. Those of you who haven't been keeping up, her motion for new trial was denied, and all of my motions to get access to the records, all of my FOIA requests have also been denied. The judge has issued an order saying that the FOIA requests cannot be responded to until after Chad's trial next year. So it wasn't unexpected. And at this point, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. We'll wait and see. When it comes to Chad and what may happen with him, I think that we're going to see some movement in his case once Lori is sentenced. Now, remember, Lori's case, the judge dismissed the death penalty, but Chad is still facing the death penalty. So I think that we're going to see, once Chad has seen Lori's sentencing and knows what it is that the court is going to impose, he may very well be asking to enter a plea and get the equivalent sentence. So we don't know yet, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. I think that the state would very much like to get the case resolved because I don't think they want to try this case again. And I think that Chad's best chance at avoiding the death penalty is going to be to make a deal. So we'll wait to see what he decides. I have been writing every day on the Vallow Daybell book, and I thought I would just share with you a little snippet of my reading materials. So I'll just let you sort of let that sink in for a minute. These are all books that I have read in preparation to write my book, all books that I have used as reference material as I have been working through my outline and where this book is going to go. So it was a busy fall and winter while we waited for Lori's case to come up. So the next thing I wanted to give you a quick update on is the Kohberger case. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar, Kohberger is the case of the University of Idaho, 4 University of Idaho students that were murdered in their off-campus apartment. The state has filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. There have been much back and forth about discovery, as you might expect. In the defense's motions having to do with discovery, they have brought out that there was DNA from 2 other males found in the household. Along with Brian Kohberger's. That those DNA depositors have not been identified. We know that Ethan Chapin was there that night and was there quite frequently. We also know that that was something of a party house. And if they only found the DNA of 2 unidentified males in the house, I'd be surprised. But right now, the defense wants to know who those other 2 males are and what sort of testing was done on those DNA samples. And they are pressing to get that information. The judge so far is allowing cameras in the courtroom, although the judge also pointed out that he could change that ruling at any time. And it is possible that at some point we could see a change like we did in the Vallow Daybell case. Although it was interesting that when the state pointed out that their non-dissemination order was similar to the one that had been entered in the Vallow Daybell case, the judge said Vallow Daybell got it wrong. The judge in Vallow Daybell got it wrong. There's no legal underpinning for what he did, and I'm not going to follow that that form of the order. So, and the judge did loosen up the non-dissemination order somewhat. Now, the non-dissemination order, that's the gag order. That doesn't have to do with cameras in the courtroom and the publicity. That has to do with what the parties and their lawyers can talk to the press about. So, excuse me. So that really has to do with what the lawyers and their clients can talk to the press about. The judge did loosen up those. By the way, the judge in this case, his name is Judge. So he is Judge. He did loosen up the non-disclosure agreements and when it came to the victims' families. So the next thing, we know the trial is set for October. At this point, we have not seen anything that would indicate that Brian Kohberger has waived his right to a speedy trial. So we don't really know whether or not a trial is going to occur in October. I sort of think there's a less than 50-50 chance of that. I think at this point it's interesting that in the Vallow Daybell case, they were talking about somewhere around a terabyte of digital information that was going to be a discovery that was going to be made. In the Kohberger case, they're talking about something around 30 terabytes. So it would be insane to think that they're going to be ready for trial in October with the death penalty on the table. So I'm certain that Ann Taylor and her team are having those conversations with Brian Kohberger right now. So the next case I want to talk about is Delphi. Richard Allen was taken into custody after 8 years of trying to find the murderer in the case of Abby and Libby, who were 2 14-year-old girls who were out on a hike and who didn't come home. The biggest bombshell out of that case is that Richard Allen has confessed to his wife over jail communication that was recorded jail phone calls. Since that time, the state has had him evaluated because the defense has been saying you can't take anything he says for true because he is so emotionally beaten down and so physically beaten down by the environment in the prison where he is. And he's got serious health issues. And so you should not take seriously what it is he says because he's not competent. So the state has asked for an evaluation, and the state is saying that they believe he's competent. Apparently, he confessed more than one time to his wife in a single conversation, but said it more than once. And when that happened, she hung up, and he then broke the tablet that he was using to have jail phone calls, and he has not had a single jail phone call since. I'm certain a lot of it has to do with his lawyers telling him, don't you dare talk to anybody. But, you know, I do think that in some circumstances, it is difficult for people who are in jail to always remember when they've got a familiar voice or a familiar face on the other end, that other people are listening as well. I'm not sure that's the case with this. I think that Richard Allen knew what he was saying and likely wants to move this case along because of the conditions where he is. So I don't know, but I'm sure that we will hear a lot more about that coming up. And so I wanted to just point out very quickly the Chandler Halderson case. Now, this was a case that occurred a year or so ago, and that occurred in Wisconsin, and that it was a terrible case where a man that was living at home and had spun this whole web of lies about how he was finishing college and he was going to go to work at SpaceX, and he had all of these big lofty things that he was telling friends and family, none of which were true. And as those things started to close in on him and people were starting to get wise to the issues, he was living at home while he was going to school, but he wasn't really going to school, but he had everyone fooled. As the news started to tighten around and people started getting suspicious, he murdered and dismembered his parents. This is a really, really gnarly, difficult case. Very sad. And it is in the past. He has been tried and sentenced. But the reason I bring it up is because if it's a case that interests you, Gigi from Pretty Lies and Alibis has been doing a deep dive into it, a review of it. She was recently asked to go to Wisconsin to appear because she covered the case heavily. She was recently invited to go to Wisconsin and appear in what appears to be a documentary. So she's doing a review. So if you're at all interested in that case, I would highly recommend that you tune in to Gigi. We've had 2 or 3 cases that have been streaming that we've had the trial streaming that I wanted to just touch upon. One is the YNW Melly James Demons case. He's a rapper who is accused of murdering 2 of his bandmates. He claims that the car was shot up in a drive-by shooting. The state has put on proof to show that the bullets came from inside the car and not outside. The car was shot up from the outside, but the bullets the fatal bullets that killed the victims in this case occurred from inside the car. It's been a really interesting case to follow. There certainly have been some questionable behavior on the part of the defense. His defense attorney is a little rough around the edges and has spent quite a bit of time with him, sort of joking and giggling and really kind of untoward behavior and behavior that I'm certain the jury is finding questionable. We also had the Parkland school officer. His name is Scott Peterson. He was a school resource and security officer at the Parkland, and he was charged for neglect and for failure to do his duties. He was found not guilty, and I think that's the right call in this case. But I think that it is interesting in light of the fact that the sheriffs and the law enforcement in the Uvalde shooting drew a great deal of criticism for standing outside, hearing the children screaming and not doing anything. So it will be interesting to see whether or not, with this not guilty verdict, whether or not there is also where they bring any charges in the Uvalde shootings. Now, there are different jurisdictions, so that can play into it as well. Then we have the Border Patrol agent. His name is Ronald Burgos Aviles, who murdered his baby mama and his own son after she asked for child support. He was married, has 2 young children with his wife, and he and his wife had a series of problems. They'd been sort of together and apart on several different occasions, and he also got involved with the female victim. The little boy was 18 months old, and up until this point, she had told him when she became pregnant, and she told him that she believed the child was his. But they had had very little contact since then, and she had never asked for anything. Well, she had begun asking for child support, and it appeared that the state was going to begin assessing child support, and that would mean that his wife would find out that he'd had this affair and had this baby. And so he is accused of meeting up with her in a park and then taking her life and the life of their young son. It's kind of an interesting case. It's down along the Rio Grande River where Border Patrol are very busy. And it appears that he committed the act. He then went home and cleaned up and changed his clothes and went back. And I don't know that anyone is really sure what his intention was in going back to that park. It was within the area that he was assigned to patrol. But when he got there, there was another officer with a trainee parked in the parking lot. And I think he was not prepared for there to be other people around. But he found the body of the woman, and EMTs were called. She was beyond help. And then when they began to canvass the area, they also found the body of the baby. He did a lot. He had a lot of quite strange behavior during the when the body was found and while they were waiting for the EMTs to come, including going around and picking up a tennis shoe and bringing it back and putting it next to her body, picking her up, touching the body without gloves, several things that were real red flags for the other Border Patrol officer that was there, who was the guy who was parked in the parking lot. So It seems obvious that he didn't anticipate that there were going to be other officers around when he found the body, but it didn't take them more than about an hour to figure out who the woman was, who the victim was, and who she was connected to. It was interesting. She had borrowed her sister's car to go to the park, and when they ran the plates, it went back to the sister. She had just been at the sister's house an hour or two before when she borrowed the car and told her that she was going to meet the baby daddy, who was this Border Patrol officer, Ronald Burgos Aviles. So that trial is right in the midst of the trial. So that's an interesting one to watch. And then lastly, before I get into my story, is Corey Richins. This is the Utah mother, 2 young children, who is accused of murdering her husband by lacing a drink with fentanyl. And then after he died, writing a children's book about how you help get your children through grief when they lose a parent. The sister-in-law in the case, on behalf of her brother's estate, has now filed a $13 million suit to recover money and property that the wife was stealing from the husband, and was the basis of her murdering him, essentially. She had started a business where she was buying and flipping homes. She was using marital money and not telling him, was far into debt, and deeply into debt. And in spite of the fact that she was millions of dollars into debt, told him that she wanted to use the family home to secure the purchase of a $2 million home that she wanted to fix up and flip. And he wouldn't do it. And that appears to have been the impetus for her to murder him. We saw a bail hearing happen for her, and the prosecution laid out a great deal of evidence in the bail hearing, similar to what they would put on in a preliminary hearing. And so we got to see a lot of what the state case looks like. They identified the person who helped her procure the fentanyl. It was their housekeeper, who had been clean and sober for several years. She reached out to an old drug contact and put Corey in touch with that person. And so they have a fairly persuasive timeline involved, and a fairly persuasive motive in her need for money and for him not to obstruct her business deals. So that one, she has not been set for trial yet, so it will be interesting to see how soon that one is set. And then I want to tell you a story. This is a story of a case that happened in my hometown in Bend, Oregon in 2016. I was still practicing, and I knew a lot of the people involved in this case. I knew the lawyers that were assigned to the case. I knew all of the police officers that were involved, and I actually knew the defendant's wife. So, sorry, we're still struggling with allergies as usual. So this is a case of Kaylee Sawyer. Kaylee Sawyer was a 23-year-old woman living in Bend, Oregon, born and raised in Bend, Oregon, and she was a part-time student at the community college. She was attempting or getting qualified she wanted to go to dental school. At the time of her death, she was a dental assistant and was working at a dental clinic. She had been dating the same young man, his name's Cameron, for about 2 years. And she went out on a weekend evening to a bachelorette party with several of her friends. And they went to bars in downtown Bend, as young folks often do. And they were celebrating this woman's bachelorette party. Kaylee was there and had gotten quite drunk, and her friends were concerned because she was dancing and flirting with another guy who was not her long-term boyfriend at this party. And they really didn't want her to get into any trouble. So one of her friends reached out to the boyfriend, Cameron, and suggested that Kaylee come and get, that somebody come and get Kaylee. And so at the time, he and Kaylee were living together in an apartment near the local community college, very close, right on the edge of the campus. There are several large apartment complexes. There's no on-campus housing for the community college in Bend, but there are several large apartment complexes right on the very edge of the campus, so that it's literally walking distance into the campus. So that evening, Cameron took Kaylee home, and when they got to their apartment, he was mad at her. They'd had a fight on the way home. I don't really know the substance, but I can imagine, girlfriend's very drunk, been flirting with somebody else at a party. I'm sure you can imagine that they had a disagreement. So he was angry. They argued back and forth, and when they both got out of the car, instead of going into the apartment, Kaylee walked away. He tried to stop her. He told her to come into the apartment. She said, "I just need to walk and cool off." But she was very drunk, and he kept trying to get her to come in. So he finally went in the apartment, thought he'd give her a few minutes to cool off. 10 minutes later, he went out, couldn't find her anywhere. Got in his car, drove around the campus, drove around the apartment complexes, couldn't find her anywhere. Then called her best friend, called her parents. No one had seen Kaylee. Kaylee's car was still parked at her best friend's house because she had driven with the carload of bachelorette ladies downtown. So the following day, when nobody had heard from Kaylee, they called the police. Well, the police began looking for her, and they talked to everyone. They talked to Kaylee's best friend where her car was parked. They talked to the boyfriend because sorry about that. They, of course, talked to the boyfriend because the boyfriend's always the prime suspect, and usually rightfully so. This case is really an outlier. They talked to Kaylee's parents. Kaylee's parents are divorced, but both live in Bend, have good relationship with one another and with Kaylee. And so they talked to both parents, and they searched through everything that you typically would search through: cell phones, text messages, all of those things, and could not turn up any evidence of Kaylee after her series of text messages with Cameron when he was in the apartment, and she said she was going to take a walk and cool off. She also told him that her telephone was almost out of batteries. So it wasn't a complete surprise when she didn't respond that her phone went dead. So by the second day, they had begun looking for, in earnest. They turned out search and rescue. They turned out. Now, what you have to know about Bend is high desert, but it's a ski town, and a lot of the area around Bend is very heavily wooded, And so it is not unusual when someone goes missing for the sheriff's department to turn out search and rescue and to really do a full-scale search. So that's what was happening. No sign of Kaylee. So in the other part of town, a married couple, been married several years, the woman in the married couple reached out and contacted police because she had concerns that her husband had been acting strange. Both of these individuals, she was a newly hired police officer in the Bend Police Department. She had only been on the job a few months. She had gone to the police academy and come back and had been on the job a few months. He was a campus security guard at the community college, at Central Oregon Community College. He worked the night shift, which essentially meant that he was a door rattler. He went around and made sure all the buildings were secured and went around and made sure that people weren't on the campus when they weren't supposed to be, that there weren't people prowling around or using the campus for inappropriate reasons, shooing off the homeless people, those sorts of things. So she had worked a shift and gotten home. He worked a night shift, and when he came home, she was already asleep. Now, their names were Isabel and Edwin Lara, Lara. He came in and got in bed with her. They woke up the next morning. It was a Sunday. They went to church and kind of had a normal day, watched movies, had dinner. And then the following day, he went to work. She went to work. When he came home, he said to her, "I have to tell you something. I killed somebody." Now, he told her, and this is the story that he initially gives the police, that she had been walking along the dark road. Roads in Bend are very dark. There are not always street lights on all of the smaller residential roads. So he said she was dressed in black, which she had been, and was walking along the road, and that he had hit her with his patrol car and he'd killed her. Well, that wasn't exactly what happened, but that's what he told her. And he also told her that he had panicked and he'd hidden the body. She then said, "You have to go to the police." And he said, "No, I don't." He took her gun, her service gun, and their car and left. She then started texting him, started texting other family members, and she was trying to get him to come back and turn himself in. She came under criticism for not immediately going to the police, but it was several hours before she went to the police. So she went to the police department and she explained to them what had happened, that he'd been acting kind of odd. And then he blurted this out, grabbed her gun, his car, their car, and drove away. So she was trying to figure out where he was going. She assumed that he would be going toward Los Angeles because that's where he had family. So what he did was he drove from Bend to Salem, Oregon, which is about a 2-hour drive over the Cascade Mountains into the Willamette Valley. And when he got to Salem, he pulled off into a shopping center area where there was a Ross store. And he was looking for a car. He was looking to ditch the car that he was driving. Initially, he went to his parents' house and he took their car. Then he was looking to get rid of his parents' car and pick up a car that no one would be looking for. And he watched this young woman come out of the Ross store. She was a Ross employee. Get a Ross bag out of the back of her car because she was taking it back in to do a return, and then coming back out and getting in her car. And he carjacked her and kidnapped her at gunpoint. So they drive from Salem, which is about 50 miles south of Portland, and they drive south on Interstate 5, headed for California. And they get as far as, I need to get the story straight, but they get as far as the south of the California border, and he's getting very tired. Well, I take that back. They get to around the Eugene area. There are two different hotel incidents, so I want to be clear about this. They get down to the Eugene area, which is about another 90 miles south, so within 100 miles or so of the Oregon-California border. And he says he's taken over driving. When he first gets her in the car, he makes her drive. But she's a new driver, and he's concerned that she's driving too fast, and he doesn't want the police to be alerted. So he makes her get over, and he starts driving. So when they get down to almost to the California border, and he says, "I'm too tired to drive anymore. We need to stop." So he checks them into a roadside motel. The girl is surprised that she's 17, so she's young, and she's surprised that the hotel clerk doesn't seem at all suspicious of her demeanor or the fact that she's there with this much older man. He's in his mid-30s, I think. And so they check into the room. They're there long enough that he takes a shower. He tries to get her to take a shower. She says no. It's clear that that he may have something else on his mind. They get into the queen size bed, and he starts making overtures. And about that time, the alarm on her telephone goes off. She says she doesn't even remember why the alarm was set. But when he starts thinking that she's in some way alerted the police. She says no, that it was an alarm for her to take her medicine. And then in a stroke of brilliance, he asks her what she's taking the medicine for, and she says, "I have an STD." But he is now all amped up again because of this alarm going off. So he says, "That's it. I think you tipped off the police." He gets very paranoid, and they leave. They get back on the road going I-5 south, and they're driving her car, and her car begins having some mechanical issues. It's leaking oil, and he decides that he needs to get a different car. So they pull into yet another roadside motel. It's about 5 o'clock in the morning, and there is a man loading his luggage and his belongings into a car right outside his hotel room. Well, Lara shoves the girl into the hotel room, says to the man, has the gun out and brandishes a gun at him and says, "I want your car keys." And the guy looks at him and says, "I don't think so." And he says, "If you don't give me your car keys, I'm going to shoot you." And the guy shakes his head, and Lara shoots him in the stomach. The guy says it all happened in about 15 seconds. And then Lara grabs the girl, rushes her out, and they run across a parking lot around 100 yards away to a gas station. And when they come upon the gas station, there is a family. They are Middle Eastern family. The grandmother doesn't speak any English. Two boys, two young teenage boys, the father of the two young boys, and the father's parents, mother and father. So the father and the grandfather have gone into the store to use the restroom, and their cars finished refueling. The grandmother and one of the boys is in the back seat. The other boy is in the front seat because the father has just asked him if he will drive. Well, he's 17 and just has his learner's permit. So Laura comes up, throws the girl in the car, jumps in the back seat, holds the gun to the kid's head and says, drive. Grandma's in the back seat screaming, and off they go. And they head lickety-brindle down I-5. Well, of course, by this time, the hotel clerk has called 911 about this man who's been shot in the hotel. The police have been alerted to what happened at the gas station. And of course, the father and the grandfather are frantic because their family's in the car with this guy with a gun who's already shot somebody and already kidnapped somebody. And so then what transpires is a trip down I-5, still attempting not to attract any attention. At some point, and I think it probably is because the grandmother doesn't speak any English and she is absolutely terrified and freaked out and won't stop screaming, that he decides to pull off to the side of the road and to make them get out of the car. So the family they picked up in the gas station, the grandmother and the two young teenage boys, get out by the side of the road. Laura then takes off in their car. The young woman who's with him, her name is Andrea, asks him, why don't you leave me here too? Because now you got what you want, you have a car. And he says, oh, no, because if I let you go, they might shoot me. If you're with me, they won't shoot me. So they continue on down the highway, and it becomes a high-speed pursuit because, of course, the police know the car that they're in, know that he's armed and dangerous, know that he has a hostage. And so now he's got police behind him, and he starts a high-speed chase. And the speeds get upward of well over 100 miles an hour, up in the 120 range. And he's coming up on Brookings, around that area. No, not Brookings. Northern California. Anyway. And he calls, he's got all his police cars behind him. So he calls 911 and tells them, I'll give myself up, but I don't want you to shoot me. And I want to do it at the next town. And the dispatcher is talking to him and talking to Andrea. He keeps passing the phone over to her. And the dispatcher says, why don't you stop now before somebody gets hurt in this high-speed chase? Pull over to the side of the road. The officers who are behind you know they won't shoot you. Please pull over. It's not Crescent City. It is the town that's always so hot. I can't think of it, but anyway, he agrees to pull over. So his speed starts to diminish. Police pull up behind him. He holds his hands out the window. He gets out of the car. They tell him to turn around and walk backwards toward them. He does that, and they put him in handcuffs. The most difficult part of it is that they don't know, and the police are not not familiar with these people, they don't know that she is not his accomplice. And so they arrest her as well. And it takes another day or so before the Bend police get to where he's being held in California and are able to assure the authorities that she was a victim and not an accomplice. So she winds up, after all of the trauma that she's been through, they arrest her, they strip search her, they treat her as if she is an accomplice. And so, but finally he is arrested. She is initially arrested and then released and makes it her way home. And I am just double checking my notes. And so the Oregon police go down to do the first interviews with him. He waives extradition. They bring him back to Oregon. He ultimately pleads guilty and is sentenced to life in prison. So some of the interesting things for me are, I knew all of the police officers, the lead detective and all of the police officers that were involved in the case because I had worked with them for years. I also knew Isabel Lara. Apparently it had been her dream to be a police officer, but before she had become a police officer, she was a child welfare officer and worked in child protective services. And so the last few years of my career, I did a great deal of juvenile work, including a lot of child welfare cases with kids that were removed and put into foster care. And so I knew her. She was a very lovely woman, and her life was destroyed in that one night. So she ultimately resigned from the police force there in Bend. She very promptly filed for divorce and divorced Edwin Lara. And the last I heard, she was living in the Portland area. I don't know whether she was ever able to get back into law enforcement or not. But it was a very strange story. He had no criminal history. There was no indication that that this would happen. But he initially minimized his involvement, saying he'd hit her with his car. Then he said he hit her with his car and she was screaming, and he panicked and hit her with a rock. Later, it came out that he hit her with a rock when he thought she was dead. He took her to a remote parking lot there at the community college. She began screaming or crying again. He then got a much bigger rock and bludgeoned her, and then raped her body. While he was still in California, the police asked him to reveal where he had left her body. And after some sort of pushing back and forth and them saying, dude, you don't have any bargaining chips, so you might as well tell us, he did reveal where Kaylee's body could be found. And the police were able to recover her body. There were some very interesting things that came out of this case. One of the things that came out of the case was a move by Kaylee's family and what became Kaylee's Law in Oregon, which is a law that precludes campus security from wearing uniforms or in any other way appearing to be armed, sworn law enforcement officers, because they are not. They are not sworn peace officers. And so it was thanks to Kaylee's family that the universities were all told that they could no longer have campus security traveling around in vehicles that had light bars and sirens. They could no longer have the big push bumpers on the front of the cars. They could no longer in any way have vehicles that looked like they were law enforcement vehicles. And the campus security could not wear uniforms that made them appear to be sworn police officers. So that was something that came out of it. This was not the first incident throughout the country of campus security guards who had used their authority to abuse or mistreat women, to engage in rape, to engage in untoward behavior with drunk college students. So the law has continued to move across the country, and Kaylee's parents have become very passionate advocates for those laws throughout the U.S. So it's a little bit of a silver lining. Now, speaking of silver linings, I do have some things that I want to tell you about in terms of new resources and new places that you might want to take a look at. First of all, if you want to listen in depth to Kaylee Sawyer's story, there is an 8-episode podcast called Urge to Kill. It was done by KGW TV in Portland, Oregon. And the link is in our show notes. It is called Urge to Kill, and it is on, you can get it on any of the YouTube, any places where you get podcasts. It is not a YouTube show, it is a podcast. In addition, going back to the Vallow Daybell story, Lori Daybell's brother Adam and her uncle Rex, who you may have seen during the trial if you followed Justin Lum or Nate Eaton, because both of them interviewed him at the in front of the courthouse. He is, I think I have this right, he is Janice Cox's brother, and was close to Lori and Lori's family growing up. And of course, Adam Cox is Lori's brother, her surviving brother. They have just started a YouTube channel. They intend to do 12 episodes of the YouTube channel. It is called JJ and Tylee's Silver Linings. I think that's right. The link is also in our show notes. So they are intending to collaborate on a book that they plan to self-publish by the same title. And really just, it grew out of Uncle Rex saying how impressed he was by the people who were at the courthouse, how many people had been brought together, people from disparate backgrounds who've been brought together over the trial and over the children's deaths, and how impressed he was with the true crime community, as well as with the court staff, prosecutors, all of those folks, law enforcement. So I watched the first episode. It's a little over half an hour, I think. It was very interesting, and I think we're going to see some even more interesting things come out of it. I can't say that I heard things that I had not heard before, but I think it was very interesting hearing that from Adam and from Lori's uncle. So you can look that up. It is a YouTube channel, and you can find that in our show notes as well. So with that, we're about at the 1 hour mark. And so I'm going to take your questions. So I want to thank you all while Michelle is pulling up questions. I want to thank you all for being here. Once again, thanks for all the good wishes as I've been recovering. And so I feel good, and I feel like we'll be able to go forward with the podcast. Thanks too for all your good wishes for my daughter's wedding. It was a lovely week, and now she's an old married lady. Hi, Denicia. What are your thoughts on Adam and Rex's podcast? At first, I was interested, but now I think they're giving Pryor extra fodder to use for Chad's benefit. So happy you're recovering well. Thank you. I don't know that they're giving Pryor a lot of extra fodder. Frankly, I think we know. We've seen what's gone on in the trial, and I think we know, with the exception of potentially some of Chad's text messages that weren't offered in Lori's trial. I think we know what's going to be presented in Chad's trial. So we've pretty much seen all the evidence. Pryor's seen all the evidence. I don't really feel like it's going to necessarily give Pryor any extra fodder than he was already going to use. I don't think there's any question that if Chad goes to trial, Lori's going right under the bus. He is not going to protect her the way she protected him. I think we've all said that all along. And I think that it was obvious from Lori's trial that she was upset when her attorneys brought up Chad and shifted some of the blame to Chad in closing arguments. I don't think that she ever wanted that to happen. So, but I think we're not going to see that same courtesy from Chad. So I don't know that I don't particularly think that Adam and Rex know anything more than has been presented to law enforcement. So I'm not sure how much more they could offer. But good question. As usual, you all ask really good questions. We're not dealing with just definitions and what things mean anymore. You all know that. And now we're moving along into how the evidence starts to impact the cases. Hi, Barty B. Question: the prosecution encouraged Lori's uncle Rex, according to him, to send an impact statement to the judge. Wouldn't that also be reason for the defense to say the judge was unfairly swayed? Yeah, I think it would. And I think if I had to guess, I don't think Judge Boyce will read any impact statements that aren't from the immediate family. I just think if Judge Boyce is anything, he is a straight arrow. And when it comes to those sorts of things, so I expect that he will not. He won't read them. That doesn't mean they can't be sent. They can't become part of the court file. But I think that he will not consider them before he passes sentence on Lori. Hey, Sarah Adams. Would I consider covering the Sarah Boone case? So I will have to look that case up. That's I'm not jumping to being familiar with it right away, but I will look it up, and I will consider it. One case I am not following is the Natalie Grace case. There is something about that case that just feels off. And I don't know what it is, but there's something off about that case, and I'm not comfortable digging deep into it or wasting my time with it. So I won't be covering that one. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this was a person who was adopted from a Russian, I think, or Ukrainian adoption agency. She is the adopted parents claim that she was an adult when she was adopted, that she was not 8 or 9 years old, as they were told, that she actually was a full-grown adult with a form of dwarfism. So it's a very strange case, and I don't think either she or the foster or adopted parents are without fault And there's just too many weird things about the case, and it's too much clickbait. So we won't be going there. But I will look into the Sarah Boone case. Lovely Sarah, who loved my reference to On Back Beaches and wanted to know if that was a reference to the ever popular Bette Midler, which it might have been. So I am going to look up Sarah Boone, and I will have some info for you next time. Were you able to refile your motions? And what did Judge Boyce say? Thank you and God bless. I did refile my motions, and Judge Boyce summarily denied them and made some pretty insulting remarks in his court order. And I'm still trying to decide what to do about that. So. Crash D. Question, not really. Lori, you look great. Glad your recovery is going so well. Thank you. Thanks. It was, the first few days were challenging. Since about day 3, I have been sort of steadily needing less pain medication. I'm off all the pain meds now, but over-the-counter stuff. And so I'm trying to walk a lot. I'm taking the dogs to the dog park, and they have a little concrete path that runs around it. And I'm doing my dog park laps and doing physical therapy. So I'm doing all the things the doc told me to. For those of you who are in the Boise area and would love to get together for lunch, just let me know, because I'm actually driving for the first time yesterday, and I'm cleared to drive again. So rather be in Maui. Oh, you and me both. Question, will you be attending the sentencing for Bad Lori? Have you heard if this is by pre-registration or first come? It is first come, first served. My understanding is they may have an overflow courtroom where they will be broadcasting remotely. My understanding at this point is the judge is not, I could be wrong about this, is not going to permit cameras for the sentencing. You do just have to get there and line up. And I don't know whether the judge will let me in or not, but I am going to go. So I think there's going to be an overflow courtroom where it will be broadcast closed circuit like it was before, but I am not 100% sure whether the judge is going to allow the sentencing to be televised. I don't believe so. And I think that was out of respect for the victims. And it can be very difficult for the victims to get up and read their impact statements, or if they're not comfortable reading their own statements, the district attorney will do it for them. But it is difficult for them to do that. And so my recollection is in my post-surgery haze that the judge said he was not going to permit cameras, live stream of the sentencing, but that he would be releasing the way they did. It would be releasing the audio afterwards. If you all know something different, let me know, because I'm not 100% clear on that. Hi, Jacqueline. Would I consider the Summer Wells case? Yes. Now, there are 2 young girls about the same age, both of whom went missing. My recollection is that Harmony, there's been an arrest made. Her father's been arrested in her case. But Summer Wells' body's never been found, and there has never been an arrest made in her case. I could have those backwards, but because there's been 2 young little girls that have disappeared about the same time and have been missing about the same amount of time. So, but I would consider covering the Summer Wells case. I'm also quite interested in the Chad Dorman case. This is the case of the father who executed his 3 sons. It happened about a week and a half ago. Horrible story, absolutely horrible story. It's been all over the media because the body cam footage of his arrest was released, as were the 911 calls. So that one is a horrible case. I'm interested in that one. It is interesting, as I have been studying and researching for the Vallow book. Mothers and fathers often have very different motivations for killing their children, and fathers tend to be family annihilators. And we don't really know whether we talked about family annihilators when we talked about the Murdoch case. We don't really know at this point whether Chad Dorman intended to be a family annihilator. We know that the mother of the boys attempted to keep him from shooting the children, and he shot her in the hand, but we don't know whether he intended to annihilate the rest of the family. There was also the mother had a daughter from a previous relationship who is 13, 14, who ran down the road to the fire department across the street for help. She was screaming, "He's killing my family." So we don't really know at this point what his intention was beyond killing the 3 little boys. So the youngest one was 4. I think the oldest one was 7. So I'm interested in that case. I'm very interested in the Brian Kohberger case because I think that there are some interesting, I believe that he was a serial killer in the making. And I wonder whether there are parallels to he and Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was a serial killer who admitted to several crimes once he was apprehended, and then ended his own life in jail before he could be prosecuted. And so, but he was a very organized killer. Oftentimes when we hear experts talk about serial killers, we hear them talk about them being either organized or disorganized. And that has to do with their emotional states. And Israel Keyes was a very organized offender. And I think that we'll find that Brian Kohberger is as well. So that kind of interests me from that standpoint. So, other questions? Hi, Sarah Adams. I had no idea surgery had happened. Godspeed. Thank you very much. Surgery did happen, and ta-da! I'm already back at it. So, thanks. Crush D. Nady Eaton from East Idaho News has said many times that the sentencing of Lori Vallow will be televised like the verdict was. Okay. I honestly can tell you that I wasn't clear on it. So that's good news if the verdict is going to be televised. I think it's appropriate that the sentencing be televised, but I could also understand reasons why the judge would want to shield the victims and their impact statements from being broadcast and live streamed. So. Gerald McCrill, I'm having a little trouble seeing my screen tonight. It's a little too far away from me. So, Lori, what happened to the girl he kidnapped, and have you heard how she's doing? This is in reference to Edwin Lara kidnapping the girl who was coming out of Ross. I want to say she was about 19 when this happened in 2016. We haven't heard anything, and her family has been very cautious about keeping her protected. When the podcast was made, The Urge to Kill, and I want to be sure I have the right date, because I think it was 2018, just before. Oh no, it was December of 2019, so just before COVID, the COVID shutdown happened. And at that point, they interview her for that podcast, and she was doing quite well. So, but there's no doubt it was traumatic, and no doubt that she needed some in-depth therapy to move past it, because it was a very traumatic experience. She was standing right next to him when he shot the guy in the stomach, and said it was so loud. She'd never been close to a gun going off. It was so loud that she wasn't even really sure whether he had shot her or the man. So that was a rough experience for her. There certainly were times that she thought that he might kill her as well. Hi, Roseanne. Lori, in the Chad Dorman case, he admitted to killing the children. So why was he able to enter a not guilty plea? Well, a not guilty plea is a formality, and you can certainly make a confession and still plead not guilty. What that means is that you intend for the state to put the state's case to the test. Now, the state is going to bring those confessions in, and it's going to be very clear that he committed the crime he's accused of. But it is the legal progression that one is indicted, you enter a plea. In general, that is a not guilty plea. On one hand, the defense has not seen the discovery yet. We've been told through the news media that he confessed. We have heard from the prosecutor at the bail hearing that he confessed. But his attorneys at that point, when he's asking to enter a plea, would not have seen those statements that he's made. So they don't know whether there is some colorable defense that they could bring up. And we still don't know what his mental state was at the time. So before his attorneys can allow him to enter a guilty plea, we'll need to know, they will will need to have seen all of the discovery and had the opportunity to actually review the statements he made to law enforcement, as well as make certain that he was competent at the time that he made those statements, as well as at the time that he enters a guilty plea. Because if he makes those statements and he's not competent, then they've got a defense. So I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but in the legal world, it makes perfect sense. Denise Rose. Whose trial is first in Arizona, Charles or Brandon? Any idea when the Arizona cases will start? I don't know. What we have right now is two separate indictments, and really two separate sets of facts. Although they are related to one another, I think we don't have the same sort of the same evidence coming in against Lori in both those cases. So I suspect they will, because we knew, I mean, it's hard to say because Brandon, apparently the indictment for Brandon was brought at the same time as Charles. We just didn't know about it. And now we know. So hard to say. If I was to guess, I would guess that they would do Charles's first, because chronologically they happen. His death happens first, and then the conspiracy to murder Brandon. And I think some of the evidence that could come in Charles's trial would be helpful in Brandon's trial. Hopefully that makes sense. Debbie Biggs, did I hear about the Rudy Farias case today? Something's not right in that case. And you know, I heard about it just enough in passing to think that it kind of piqued my interest, but I didn't look into it enough because I was re-listening to the podcasts on the Lara case. So I will look into that one. But there was something that I saw that made me think, I love it when you guys suggest cases for us to talk about. Last call for questions. Michelle's telling me it's time to shut down and I'm ready. So last call for questions. Otherwise, if there aren't any more questions, I want to thank you all for sticking with us. We lost about 80 subscribers over the 2 weeks that I was laid up. I think that's kind of normal. People lose interest and move on. But our numbers look great. We're up in the high 8,000s, almost to 9,000 subscribers. And that's very exciting. I know for a lot of these podcasts that have 100,000, it's no big deal, but for us, it's a big deal. We had over 500 people in our live chat tonight. So thanks for joining me. If it's your first time here, thanks so much. If you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe, like this video, and click on the bell so that you get notifications when we go live. So if there are developments, we will go live other than on Wednesdays. But on most weeks, you will find us Wednesday, 6 p.m. Pacific, right here, right out of lovely Boise, Idaho. And we'll be talking soon. Thanks again for all your good wishes. And thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to say good night. Good night, Michelle. Thanks to all those who sent Michelle super chats. All of your super chats go directly to our moderator. So once again, thanks and good night.